Welcome to our channel. Today we're diving into the pivotal events that shaped India's fight for independence from British rule. It's a story full of inspiring leaders, acts of incredible courage, and unfortunately, also some truly horrific moments. But it's a story that needs to be told, not just because it's a fascinating period of history, but because it helps us understand the India of today. So let's grab our metaphorical history textbooks and get started. Our story begins in the mid-19th century, with India under the control of the British East India Company. Now, it wasn't just the fact of British rule that bothered Indians, though that was obviously a big part of it. What really made things unbearable were the policies the company enacted. Policies that were often exploitative, disrespectful of Indian culture, and really just demonstrated that the British saw themselves as superior. It was in this context that a seemingly small change sparked a massive rebellion. The British Army in India had introduced new rifle cartridges, and rumours spread like wildfire that these cartridges were greased with animal fat, specifically cow and pig fat. This was deeply offensive to both Hindus, who consider cows sacred, and Muslims, who consider pigs unclean. The refusal of sepoys, or Indian soldiers in the British Army, to use these cartridges was the immediate trigger of the revolt. It quickly spread from Meerut, where it began, to other parts of northern and central India. While the revolt was ultimately suppressed by the British, it was a turning point. For one thing, it marked the end of the East India Company's rule. The British government took direct control of India, ushering in the era of the British Raj. More importantly, though, the 1857 revolt planted the seeds for India's future independence movement. It showed the British that their control was not absolute, and perhaps more crucially, it awakened a nascent sense of Indian nationalism. People from different religions, regions, and backgrounds had united against a common enemy. It was a powerful symbol. The revolt had its heroes, figures like Rani Lakshmibai, the Queen of Jhansi, known for her bravery and fighting prowess, and Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, who became a symbol of resistance. The stories of their courage and sacrifice would inspire generations of Indians fighting for freedom. The 1857 revolt may not have achieved independence, but it showed that the desire for it burned brightly. The decades following the 1857 revolt saw significant social and political changes in India. A new generation of educated Indians, influenced by Western ideas of liberalism and nationalism, began to emerge. They understood that achieving independence would require a united front and a sustained organized movement, and so, in 1885, the Indian National Congress, or INC, was born. Founded by a group of Indian intellectuals and activists, including the prominent figure Dadabhai Naoroji, the INC became a platform for Indians to voice their grievances and demand greater representation in the government. Initially, the INC focused on advocating for reforms within the existing British framework. They called for more Indians in administrative positions, greater Indian participation in legislative councils, and an end to discriminatory policies. Think of it like this. Imagine a group of friends who are constantly being picked on by a much larger kid. At first, they might just try to reason with the bully, maybe point out that what they're doing is unfair. That was the INC's approach in the early days. They were making a reasoned, respectful case for why British rule needed to change. But as time went on and the bully didn't listen, that approach would, understandably, start to feel insufficient. The INC's demands were often met with resistance from the British. Meanwhile, India was facing severe economic hardship, with famines becoming increasingly common. This only fueled the growing discontent among the Indian population. The early 20th century saw the rise of more radical voices within the INC, demanding complete independence from British rule. Leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Lala Lajpat Rai advocated for Swaraj, or self-rule, and mobilized the masses through powerful speeches and writings. This was a major shift in the INC's approach. They weren't just asking for a seat at the table anymore, they were demanding the whole darn table. And the response from the British, well, let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled about it. The British government responded to this growing unrest with a mix of repression and concessions. They introduced measures to curtail nationalist activities, but also implemented some reforms to appease the moderate factions within the INC. But the seeds of discontent had been sown, and the demand for complete independence was only getting louder. Chapter 3: A Day of Infamy. The Jallianwala Bagh Massacre. The year 1919 saw a turning point in India's struggle for independence. But it was a tragic one. The Jallianwala Bagh Massacre, a horrifying act of violence by British troops, would forever scar the Indian psyche and galvanize the movement for independence. It all began with the Rowlatt Act, a law passed by the British government that allowed for the imprisonment of Indians without trial. This act, seen as draconian and unjust, sparked widespread protests across India. In the city of Amritsar, in the state of Punjab, these protests were met with brutal force. On April 13, 1919, thousands of Indians gathered in a walled garden called Jallianwala Bagh to peacefully protest the Rowlatt Act. They were unaware that the local military commander, Brigadier General Reginald Dyer, had banned public gatherings. What happened next is etched in the annals of history as a day of infamy. Without warning, Dyer ordered his troops to open fire on the unarmed crowd. Men, women, and children, trapped within the enclosed garden, were mercilessly gunned down. The firing continued for several minutes, stopping only when the soldiers ran out of ammunition. The official death toll, according to the British, was 379, with over 1,100 wounded. However, Indian accounts placed the number much higher, estimating thousands were killed. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre sent shockwaves throughout India and the world. The sheer brutality of the act, the indiscriminate killing of innocent people, sparked outrage and condemnation. The massacre became a symbol of British oppression, exposing the true nature of colonial rule. It also had a profound impact on the Indian independence movement. It shattered any remaining illusions about the possibility of achieving independence through appeals to British conscience. The massacre radicalized a generation of Indians, pushing them towards a more confrontational approach to achieving self-rule. Among those deeply affected by the Jallianwala Bagh massacre was a young lawyer named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The event would prove to be a turning point in his life, leading him to adopt a path of non-violent resistance that would ultimately shape India's destiny. Chapter 4: Salt and Satyagraha, the Salt March. By the 1930s, Mahatma Gandhi, with his philosophy of Satyagraha, or non-violent resistance, had emerged as the preeminent leader of the Indian independence movement. Gandhi understood that to truly challenge British rule, he had to mobilize the masses, and he found a powerful symbol to rally the nation's salt. Salt may seem like a mundane thing, but for Indians under British rule, it was anything but. The British government had imposed a salt tax, which meant Indians were forbidden from producing or selling their own salt and were forced to buy it from the British at exorbitant prices. This was a huge burden on the poorest Indians, for whom salt was an essential part of their diet. In March 1930, Gandhi, along with 78 followers, embarked on a 240-mile march from his ashram in Ahmedabad to the coastal village of Dandi. Their goal was to break the British salt law by producing salt from seawater. The Salt March, also known as the Dandi March, captivated the imagination of the Indian people. Gandhi's message of non-violent resistance resonated with millions. As Gandhi and his followers walked, they were joined by thousands of ordinary Indians from all walks of life. The British authorities, initially dismissive of the march, watched with growing alarm as it gained momentum. Gandhi, through his simple act of defiance, had exposed the injustice of the salt tax and, by extension, the entire system of British rule. On April 6, 1930, Gandhi and his followers reached Dandi, where he picked up a lump of salt from the seashore, effectively breaking the salt law. This act of civil disobedience sparked a nationwide movement. Across India, people began making their own salt, refusing to buy it from the British. The Salt March was a pivotal moment in India's struggle for independence. It demonstrated the power of non-violent resistance, mobilized a nation, and exposed the moral bankruptcy of British rule on the world stage. The British responded with a brutal crackdown, arresting thousands of Indians, including Gandhi. But the movement had taken on a life of its own. The Salt March showed the world that India's demand for independence could no longer be ignored. Chapter 5: The Final Push, the Quit India movement. World War II cast a long shadow over India's fight for freedom. While the British government demanded India's support in the war against Nazi Germany, Indian leaders argued that a nation fighting for its own freedom couldn't be expected to support another's empire. This tension culminated in the Quit India movement of 1942, a pivotal chapter in India's struggle for independence. In 1942, with the war raging in Europe and Asia, the British faced increasing pressure to secure India's cooperation. However, negotiations between the British government and Indian leaders, primarily Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress, reached an impasse. Frustrated with the lack of progress and sensing an opportunity in the midst of the war, Gandhi issued a clarion call to the British Quit India. The Quit India movement, also known as the August movement, called for an immediate end to British rule and declared that India would no longer participate in the war effort until it was granted independence. It was a bold move, a non-violent rebellion on a massive scale. On August 8, 1942, the All India Congress Committee ratified the Quit India resolution. The next day, Gandhi, along with other prominent Congress leaders, was arrested by the British authorities. This sparked widespread protests and demonstrations across the country. The British responded with swift and brutal repression. Public gatherings were banned, and the police and army were given sweeping powers to quell the unrest. Thousands of Indians were arrested and many were killed or injured in clashes with the authorities. Despite the crackdown, the Quit India movement spread like wildfire. With their leaders imprisoned, ordinary Indians took charge of the struggle. Students, peasants, workers, and even government officials joined the movement, organizing strikes, demonstrations, and acts of civil disobedience. The Quit India movement marked a turning point. It shook the foundations of British rule in India and demonstrated the unwavering resolve of the Indian people to achieve independence. The British realized that their hold on India was slipping, and the world watched as the once mighty empire grappled with the inevitable. While the Quit India movement didn't lead to immediate independence, it significantly weakened the British government's position and accelerated India's march towards freedom. The movement's legacy lived on, inspiring future generations of Indians and people around the world fighting for justice and self-determination. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical insights. India's journey to independence was long and arduous, marked by both triumphant victories and heartbreaking tragedies. But through it all, the spirit of the Indian people never wavered. Their story is a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the right to self-determination. As we reflect on India's fight for freedom, let's remember the sacrifices made by countless individuals who dared to dream of a free India. Their legacy continues to inspire us to strive for a more just and equitable world.